So welcome everyone. I'm Claire Gilman. I'm the Chief Curator at the Drawing Center, and I am here tonight with Curtis Talwst Santiago. I'm in Connecticut at the moment, and Curtis is in Munich, right? So very cruelly, we arranged this for 12 a.m. his time without thinking, but he very kindly did not say anything, did not protest. And anyway, we're really excited to have this opportunity to talk about his exhibition at the Drawing Center, Curtis Talwst Santiago, Can't I Alter? So very sadly, the show opened on, what was the actual, do you remember the actual opening date? February 14th, or
19th.
February 19th, February 18th. And we had a wonderful 3 weeks, and then we were forced to shut because of the current situation. And it is our hope that we will actually, the show is supposed to close in April, but it is our hope that when we reopen, we will, hopefully if we can reopen this summer, we will extend the show and people will be able to see the show in the summer through the early fall. That is our hope, but obviously everything is very uncertain. So, we can't say for sure right now, but we hope very much to be able to revisit the show in person. In the meantime, Curtis and I had planned on doing a walkthrough in person in the gallery. And so we decided, why not just share this opportunity with you virtually. So what you're going to be looking at on the screen are installation shots of the show, and Curtis and I are going to walk you through the show, essentially, as best we can from the entrance through the exhibition. So before I sort of turn things over to Curtis to actually physically take us through the show, I wanted to just tell you a little bit about how the show came about, and kind of go through some of the major themes of the exhibition. So I actually was introduced to Curtis's work in the most felicitous way possible, I think, which was that I happened to go to his exhibition at Rachel Uffner Gallery, not knowing what I was going to see. I did not know that I was going to see a show of Curtis Talwst Santiago. I was just going to see what was on at the gallery at that moment. And this was about 3 years ago. And I absolutely just fell in love with the work, and in particular with the drawing. And this was actually, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Curtis, but I believe this might have been the first time you had shown drawings, maybe at all, or certainly.
Yeah, I had previously shown just one drawing at the Spring Break Art Fair, which happened in February of that year, and our show happened, the Rachel Uffner show happened in November. And prior to that, I had just shown my small sculptures, and at the protest of my friend Magdalene Asimakis, the curator, she was like, let's show one drawing and just begin to introduce people to that. And I was fortunate that the drawing was purchased right away, and it was purchased by Anne Pasternak of the Brooklyn Museum, who went and spoke to other people about the work, and it kind of gave me that fuel to be like, okay, maybe I shouldn't be so shy about these things that I've been storing.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Totally. Well, I was really amazed by the drawing and felt like I was seeing something in them that I really had not seen before. And so I began a correspondence with Curtis, first over WhatsApp, and then when he was living, I think, kind of itinerantly at that time. And then when he came back through New York, we met in person, and I followed his work for about 2 years. And then I asked him if he wanted to do a show at the Drawing Center, and thankfully he said yes. And so this exhibition falls into the types of shows that we do, which are commissions, which we consider to be where we're really asking an artist to create something entirely new for the Drawing Center. So those are, in a way, my favorite kind of show, because you really don't know at the beginning what you're going to get at the end. So it's a big, it's really a journey that you go on with the artist. And I think in this case, that sort of metaphor of journeying is particularly apt because, in fact, the theme of the show is also about journeying. And Curtis really did physically go on a journey or many journeys in preparation for this show. So I want to just mention, and actually up on the screen, I don't know if you can see it or if it's partly blocked, but is the wall text, the front wall text that greets you when you come into the show. So you're welcome to read that now as I kind of talk through some of the themes that are mentioned in that wall text. But I wanted to talk to you about two, because there are really kind of two episodes that are sources for this exhibition, sort of two very important occurrences in Curtis's life that kind of fed into this show. So the first one goes way back in time. So Curtis was born in Canada, but his parents had immigrated from Trinidad, I think in the late 60s.
That's right.
And his first visit to Trinidad came when he was age 7. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And happened to be during the time of Carnival, which is obviously a very exciting time in Trinidad. So Curtis was really kind of overwhelmed by just this rush of activity and color and celebration, and also the presence of all these family members around him, you know, who claimed to sort of know him, who he didn't know. And he was particularly struck by the tradition of applying clay, and particularly red clay, to the faces of family members. And so flash forward many years later, he began using, he sort of just, I think happen chance, started to use, took up a red spray paint can and sprayed red paint on a drawing or painting that he was working on. And it brought up for him this flash of association of his past and of his family and of this idea of ancestry. So this color red becomes for him, and particularly this image of the red face, is for him a symbol of that idea of ancestry and the quest for ancestry. And so that is one of the major themes in this show. One of the other events that was of pivotal importance to Curtis, and particularly leading up to this show, was his encounter with a work of art, and I think we can switch to that image. Yes, here we go. Which is a painting by an anonymous Renaissance Netherlandish painter, which depicts, Curtis was able to find out, a knight in the center there. Yes, a black knight of the Order of Santiago of the Red Cross, which was obviously very kind of inspirational to Curtis, this idea of, you know, his name being Santiago, Curtis Santiago. And he actually came across this image on a website that was featuring images of people of color throughout art history. And when he first saw this image, he took it as a sort of very progressive depiction of people of African descent in painting, because you see this sort of central heraldic figure striding through the square. He can tell you the story more closely, but as it turns out, when he ended up seeing the image in person, he noticed all of these instances of torture, and I think it's sort of hard to see exactly here, but often being done to Black bodies in the background. And he began to think about how complex, in a way, history and historical representation is. And he began to go on this physical quest to find out about images of of people from African descent in history and in art history, and began exploring this question of sort of representation and misrepresentation in history. And maybe you can talk a little bit about that, Curtis, now.
Sure. So the character in the painting is João San Panesco, and he was a court jester that rose to the order of knighthood. And so for me, the reason why I was drawn to this painting was it kind of happened simultaneously, where I hit this can of paper with this red, and I also discover this work online. And I had been working with such contemporary issues at the time, looking at the death of Michael Brown, the death of Eric Garner, and I needed a moment of escape. I needed to focus on something that wasn't my current day reality. And so at first, when I saw this painting online, it felt very romantic to me, because I couldn't quite see the details of everything else. And it was the idea of, well, maybe I need to go on this adventure, and I need to leave America. So in 2016, end of 2016, I get on a plane, and my first destination is South Africa. And when I arrive in South Africa, there's these men beating on the side of the road. And the idea, and most of my inspirations just, when they hit, I don't question, I just kind of follow, not blindly, but without the full understanding of where this will lead. And I decided I need to make a suit of armor, and I need to make this / carnival for Juve, the celebration, and this medieval knight. And I'm going to imagine who this character was and who his friends could be. So this starts the journey where the first location is South Africa, and I build the suit of armor that we'll see at the entrance here.
Yeah, and I think you also started to think about questions of, how much truth is there, in his representation and misrepresentation. And you were also doing a lot of investigation into the ways in which images of people of color have been changed throughout history. Yeah. For example, of the Moorish statues and the ways in which, I don't know if you wanted to talk about that.
Right. Even reading accounts in medieval poetry, of French and Dutch poetry, and they will describe a character, his skin as dark as night, and will describe a person from Africa. But then when you see the painting of them, like there's one of a Moor in Germany, and he was an astrologer. And so even in Berlin at the museum, you see the first painting of him, and he's light skinned, like almost like Alessandro Medici, curly hair. And then you go 2 rooms over, and he's now painted as this chubby, pale-faced man with no trace of his African roots to it. And so the more I started to find these instances, it was like, well, let me try to reclaim, or let me totally distort the narrative by mixing up these characters and altering and asking that question, well, can't I alter? Right. Knowing that it was almost impossible to fix, because history has this way of, of twisting for whatever reasons, often, but we'll get to that when we talk about the Waro Who Knows that we'll see later.
Right. So hence the title of the exhibition. I just wanted to sort of lead up to that. This idea of, I think Curtis essentially asked himself, if other people can write and rewrite history, if other people can change and alter history, why can't I alter? So in a sense, what you are looking at here in the show is his kind of imagining of a sort of alternate world for himself in the form of this alter ego figure. So we can go, I think, to the next image or back to the entrance to the show. Yeah. So I think there's a couple of different ways that you can look at the exhibition. You can see the or you can just sort of appreciate it in these larger thematic ideas about ancestry and the quest for ancestry and the quest for truth and the presence of fiction and the desire to create possible alternate paths and futures. But there is also a very specific narrative that you can follow, which, you'll look at this in a minute as we get to we move in a little bit closer, but essentially your guide in this installation is this fictional character, this fictional knight called Sir Dingley. And in a way, he's Curtis's alter ego, and you can talk a little bit more about what that name means. But essentially, what you are coming upon when you enter the drawing center, and so this is really the kind of entrance portal to the exhibition, is you are entering, in a sense, it's almost as though this character, this knight, Sir Dingley, has come home. He's been on this journey. He's been on this quest to discover his ancestors, to kind of find out who he is. And he's returned home. He's discarded his armor, which you'll see closer up in a minute, but you can sort of see down there at the bottom right. And he's entered this safe space, his home. And what you see when you go through the installation are images that represent both could represent his memories and could represent his his projections or his thoughts about what the future might be. And there's a lot of back and forth between fiction and reality as well, which we'll discuss as we go through. Do you want me to turn things over to you, Curtis, or do you want me to say a word about the presence of the scaffolding and the medieval?
I can touch on that. So when you enter, I wanted, first of all, this being the drawing center, a question that kept, that Claire and I kept having or talking about was, will there be drawings? Because we knew it was going to be this installation. And so the archway that you see is a paper composite. And the reason why it's blank is because I wanted it to almost feel like it's the beginning of the story, the beginning of the sketchbook. And within, if you see within the archway there's some drawings. What they are on each brick on the interior of just the archway is the ancestors, red faces. Some are visible, some are rubbed out. And it's almost like the family tree as we're looking straight through onto the orange tree in the background. The orange tree was also often used in medieval paintings, but it's also for me, again, this where I'm blurring the lines between Dingule's world and my experience in Trinidad. My grandmother had an orange tree, and it was the first time I had ever had an orange straight off the vine. So this idea of maybe you're back in Trinidad. But when Claire and I first started talking about the exhibition, I was in the space of still living, thinking about work dealing with really trauma, and thinking of Capriccio, where often Capriccio, the style where they would throw ruins up in a contemporary environment to speak of almost like the downfall, the death of Rome, the fall of Rome. And so I was like, oh, you know, the society, New York, it's this place that's eating itself, da, 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 da. But then I quickly realized that I didn't want you to have to step off the street from the harsh reality of the world into a space that was mirroring that back. So the scaffolding and the construction zone begins to feel more like the archaeological sites that I was seeing over the last 3 years when I was traveling from Brescia to Greece to Rome and in South Africa, and looking at these spaces and now wanting to blur those lines again, where the wood floor reminds you that we are in a museum, but yet the scaffolding and the wood board begins to make you think that you might be in an excavation site. Is it coming up? Is it coming down? What is important for me was that the layers be read in different ways. For example, the reason why there's mesh netting, there's a character that you will see throughout, Jab Jab. Jab Jab plays the role. He's this blue devil. Sometimes he's red, depends on where in the Caribbean, but I use the blue devil. He's also a trickster, but he carries around a net, mesh net, that he collects souls in. And so these souls can be of your ancestors and of people of your ancestors. So the mesh netting for me again plays this role of, are we in a construction site, but it also is a throwback to Carnival.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just to pick up on a few things you said, just to emphasize, you know, I think it's important to Curtis that there are multiple times and places here, right? So the architecture or the scaffolding is very specifically connected to New York, which is where Curtis was living at the time. In fact, that green color is the required color for those walls that cover scaffolding. So now you'll notice that everywhere. You haven't noticed it, New Yorkers, before. But so you're supposed to sort of have that recognition. And then people, I think, who are familiar, you know, with other places in the world will recognize those elements, like the South African beading techniques. And then obviously this mix of medieval architecture. So it's supposed to be this sense of this kind of indeterminate time and space, much like the night is experiencing these kinds of flash forwards and flashbacks. And then the other thing that Curtis mentioned, which I think is very important, this idea of building, and as he said, you know, is this thing rising or is this thing, you know, coming down? That sort of indeterminate space.
And it was also, as I began to search through Ancestry and thinking that I was coming upon a discovery, and then you take 4 steps back, the whole journey constantly and continuously feels like it's this in-between space of where you're just about to grasp it and you can't quite.
Yeah. Should we move further in?
Sure. So here we see the Sir Dingolay, and Dingolay is the word. Dingolay is a Trinidadian word, and it's my mom would use. It's about freeing up one's body, freeing oneself. So there are multiple nights in this story, but this is the first night, and he's naive, he's joyful, he's really optimistic. And so the suit is brightly colored, like in reference to Peter Minshall, who I was one of the first great carnival mass creators. So he creates the large costumes that I've seen. And there you see the helmet is sitting on a chunk of the wall. And the wall was made in an installation that I did in the Toronto Biennial, where I built the Juve Temple. And the temple acts as this time portal through video that will bring you through different locations. And so this is the prelude in this exhibition. The commissioned film is the first of 3. And in the back we see on the black paper with the red face is the first red face night that I made in 2016 while at Pioneer Works. And it was this mash of, again, everything kind of culminated at the same time, discovering my interest in looking into the medieval, the past, the Renaissance and the medieval period, and as well as Carnival, and wanting to begin to escape America, because my story was I'm Canadian, and I felt like there is a nuance between the African Canadian experience and the African American experience. And I didn't feel like it was quite my story to tell, so I needed to be diasporic and start moving. And so this is the beginning of that phase.
Right. Should we go back to the image before? I don't know what image is coming after that.
Yeah, let's go to the one after it. Okay, yeah. Right.
This was
so this is, go ahead, Claire.
Oh, okay. No, I was just going to say this is an image of the full suit of armor, which was actually in. So there are a few pieces in the exhibition that were made prior to our show. And so this is one of them. This was in a show at Rachel Uffner Gallery, but actually the vast majority of the works in the show were made for the show. I think there are about 5 works that were made previously. And so this is the sort of armor all together, and then we dismantled it for our show.
So these, it's a little hard to see the face, but these were, again, when you see the material, a large, like with my dioramas, the way you trick the eye, almost like theater tricks, like how a little piece of like my sweater, if this is green and I take this off and I attach it to the end of a dried root of a little plant, it becomes a tree. I like the idea of transforming materials, and definitely a lot of the materials have been reappropriated, like this was found in the back of the streets of behind my studio. But this tin panel, the 2 tin panels that are, when you come into the exhibition, they stand behind you, almost like centuries, centurions, I believe the word is, and they act as the initial ancestors, the great grandma and the great grandfather, and they introduce you to the story. But and as you can see, I think you can go to, let's see, the next image as well, please. Right, so the patina of that image there matches the scaffolding. I wanted to use rust as paint, and so we were able to, the scaffolding plays a role where it's not just, it acts almost like a grid in drawing throughout the whole exhibition. I kept coming back to how is this installation going to feel like drawing? So I can use these materials like charcoal, a lot of charcoal, but the scaffolding and the grid on the mesh, for me, felt like when you're doing a classical painting, how you grid things off. And so that was a connection I was hoping that would be made.
And then also just to note that the green color that's painted on the wall behind the tin piece is also the same green color that
the hunter green, yeah.
I mean, the wall scaffolding. And here you can actually see those little red faces that Curtis was speaking
on the interior of the archway. Yeah.
So yeah, so this gives you a sense of the sort of entryway. And then I think we can start to enter. Okay, so here, this would be the way. Well, you could go either. I mean, there's sort of a couple ways you can enter.
A couple pathways in, but this is the preferred entrance, because met with a surprise and a nod to my previous work, where you'll see here we play with the micro and the macro. In the background we have the large version, the wearable version of the armor, but in this little view hole, similar to how you'll have view holes in the construction site covered with plexiglass, you see the first reliquary, the first object of Sir Dingley, and this is a self-portrait of the Juve Knight. And it almost acts as a talisman that Sir Dingley would take with during travel. Often I do take dioramas with me because they're the greatest, as through the course of these 4 years, the best icebreaker, barring that will get you past language, is pulling out one of these and showing someone. It right away, it disarms them. And so we wanted to give a little nod to the previous work by placing the diorama here as just like a little Easter egg.
And maybe go back, because I'm not sure if we have, or what's the image after the diorama alone? Okay, so go back to the one before the diorama. yeah, just where we see the diorama in the hole, in the portal. Yeah.
There we go.
Um, so I just wanted to mention, and actually we could also look at the next image of the diorama, but the material, maybe that's even better. The material that Curtis is using, I mean, it's really, really quite lovely. So I don't know if you can make this out here, but on the floor here is this path of crushed stones that he's created. And this path of crushed stones is essentially the same as the path of stones and dirt that the little knight figure is standing on inside the reliquary box. So it's almost like you have this image of, I mean, and what's so wonderful about these dioramas is that it creates a very distant or a separate world, the sort of magical world that you want to enter, but you can't enter. So in a way, what Curtis is allowing us to do here is he's giving us that little taste of this other world, and then he's opening things up, and we're allowed to enter it, and we can come inside, and we're entering this knight's domain, essentially.
So and the stones and dirt in the diorama are taken from a Moorish castle in Portugal, Castelo St. George. And I love the idea that I often think of that objects and have frequency, stones have such energy to them. And so the idea that when holding it, you feel this vibration of past through it. I really believe in, I know there's been a lot of talk, and I sometimes tend to shy away from the idea of spirituality or something other. And like, because there's, artist as shaman thing is kind of weird for me, but my time in South Africa, meeting sangomas and people who would show you ways or encourage ways to be able to connect through the practice of making art with ancestors, because I think it's a good time to talk about, we hear a lot about genetic trauma. And I mentioned my escape from America at that time was to move away from working with trauma. And I wanted to, I'm like, well, if I can manifest or think about genetic trauma, why can't I think about the creativity and the joy and the imagination of my ancestors? So that was the big catalyst for the huge catalyst for taking that leap, was to be like, from this point on, I'm going to work in the feeling of what if this is possible, and to allow the imagination to create this world versus, again, I was, like I said, I was just simply like, I was making images of such suffering. And this was an act of self-care. This whole exhibition was an act of self-care, that reminding myself through putting on that armor for the first time of Sir Dingole, that feeling of Dingle, the feeling of letting loose and dropping the shoulders and just being free and being a person and a human being, and then meeting people throughout the world and being met with that back versus the preconceived notions I've had of how I would be received because of my identity. Or visual identity.
Yeah. Very lovely. So should we go, let's go on. So now we're moving into the space, and you see on the left, you are confronted by these cast paper panels, of which there are 4 in the exhibition. And they really form, in some ways, the anchor of the show. I think our next image is going to be a close-up. Yeah.
If we go back just to the previous, this space is meant to act as the cloister, the garden area with covered walkway, and which but I wrestled with how we would cover the floor. Should the floor have things on it? But I wanted again to always remind you that we are in a museum. There's moments where you feel like you're in this other environment. But I wanted this, again, this capriccio, this mashup of construction, museum, and Sir Dingole's estate. So here, that's basically, I just wanted to point out that this center space acts as the garden area, and it was going to be activated as a performance space with my band and a theater piece.
Yeah, it may still be, but we don't know. But we will go inside the cloister in a minute. We will travel inside. But should we look at the outer works? Yeah.
Sure.
So should we start with this one or the other one? I mean, it doesn't matter.
We can start with this one because this one kind of starts the story. My last exhibition at Rachel's was called By Sea, and often I was confronted when I think about the diaspora and water and boats and traveling, often it's connected to the transatlantic. And I've seen many images of slave ships, but Mansa Musa a great king in Mali, he had boats. And there's talks of the African diaspora reaching Mexico and leaving Olmec heads and different things like this. So I wanted to connect this boat and remove the idea of the slave ship for this moment. And if it's hard to tell, but it's Sir Dingley, and he's holding a merman, and the merman's back is arched, and he's just kind of surrendering. And the merman is supposed to be Nomo, who is a water god that the Dogon tribe believed in. And it's like an origin story that he descended from the dark side of the moon, and he represents one soul, but also Nomo is a word that can be used to describe many souls. So all the ancestors' idea were connected to him. And so with these panels, you have the one drawing that takes place on the white surface, but then there's these windows that have been punched, like almost like I keep connecting it to, you've come home from a night of partying, and let's say you've done hallucinogenics, and you're kind of, all these memories are flooding and moving forward and back. And that's what the idea is. Of when you look at these panels, it's like you have these time portals that can move you forward and back, but they're kind of distorted. So on the right side, where we see a colored piece just above the crest of the wave, it is originally connected to the left side of the colored section, but now it's been chopped up and flipped and reversed. And I wanted these to feel like woven quilts, because that's how I view memory at times. We restitch these key moments back together to hold a larger idea.
Right. Yeah. So just to clarify, this was a coherent, a square, essentially, a square image.
It was a 4x4.
Colored pieces, you can see would have fit in almost like Tetris or something like that. This piece over here would slot in there. And so Curtis made that in advance, and then integrated that into the white part of the composition. And then, as he said, flipped things around to create this kind of disorientation and this feeling of, again, nothing ever being complete or certain or fixed. And that's an important theme throughout the show.
And so the materiality, what it is, again, it's a paper composite that has been cast in a urethane rubber mold. And the mold is based off of, we did a mold of three different walls. So here you'll see cinder block on the top left, taken from an artist's studio that is fairly new. Then we have the traditional Brooklyn brownstone, taken from a building in Red Hook. And then in the later canvas, you'll see the chunkier rocks, which were taken from my studio, which was built in the 1800s. And it's originally some of the stones that were brought over from Europe when ships would come with the ballast at the bottom. They drop it, offload this, and take goods back. And so it's a combination, again, of different New York walls that make up our ruin walls.
Okay, I think we can go to the next panel. Do you want to talk about that, Curtis, or do you want?
Sure. So here we have, and I just wanted to, as the exhibition kind of marinates and I look back and I think about different things, I'm finding connection points. Again, like in the blue character that you'll see, on the left and on the right is Jab Jab. And again, Jab Jab plays a role of a trickster or a devil, or the trickster also being Eshu, an African god. And then in Egypt, you have Anubis. And so it connects through different cultures. But the knight who was in the original painting, he was a court jester. He was a trickster. And so I made this the other day. I'm reading about him, and I'm like, he still keeps appearing. So I feel this connection between him and the blue dog here. And in one version, in the colored panel, you see a past memory. The idea of the beginning of this show actually tends to be a lot about family. It's a origin story, like a lot of manifesting. At this time, I'm traveling for 3-4 years, and I'm on my own for a lot of it. And then all of a sudden, this desire for a change in life and companionship and my own family starts to emerge. And the person who I decide to start this family with in this painting, you see her placing the idea in my ear. So in the colored version, you have Sir Dingley, in the maroon armor, looking back on a memory, Meanwhile, the trickster is on a laptop just to the left of his feet, kind of looking at something else. And then the central character in charcoal is Sir Dingley setting out on his journey. He's setting out to go to Mass, Carnival. And that exhaustion that he has when he comes back home and drops his armor, we don't know if it's from war, battle, the world, or it's from Carnival. Because Carnival, when you're dancing in the streets, it sometimes seems violent and playful all at the same time. And so we have, again, this Capriccio style of fashion, this mashup where he's wearing more of a Moorish tunic, but he's got sneakers on, and he has the top part of his head is referencing headgear, Benin statues, and mixed with the type of hat from South Africa that women I would see also wearing. So it was this combination of different memories. While you have this figure that's drawn by hand very loose, to the right of it, you have a palm tree that's flipped on its side that is literally like just if you Google Moorish palm tree Morocco, this image comes in. So I wanted the idea of the digital and like a stencil and just playing again with line and gesture a lot. I kept coming back to, again, the idea of drawing, always reminding myself, this show has to, where's the drawing? It can't all be just the weight of these materials and things like that. So in this piece, I've used a few different techniques, and this is one of my favorites. Mm-hmm. And you can't tell, but he's walking on a street kind of paved with gold because he's feeling very optimistic. He's naive, but he's very optimistic about this journey he's about to embark on.
Yeah, and I think what's really, what happens in all your work is the relationship between drawing and painting and how they work together, which I think we can look at actually even more in when perhaps we should enter. Are we going to enter the corridor now? Let's go inside, because there's one work in there in particular where I think this really gets at that way that you integrate these two forms. So we're going inside of this corridor, and at the end wall there's this ancestor stone. It's a red face stone. I don't know if we have a closer up image of that.
We will. We do get to a closer one, I think, after two slides away. Yeah.
What's our next image? Okay. Let's just scroll through these for a little bit. Curtis, do you think?
Yeah, sure.
And then come back. Okay.
Yeah.
So focusing on some of the objects that you're finding inside this corridor. And Izzy, do you want to keep, going forward? That's the ancestor stone.
So my Caribbean roots, my great-grandmother who lived to be 102, if we go back to the stone just for a second, has Kalinago roots, indigenous to Trinidad. And in the Kalinago, the Taino, the Arawak, the indigenous folks of the Caribbean region, they do a lot of stone paintings and a lot of ancestor, like lineage works on stone. So this was my homage to them. And when I started painting on stone, it was because I discovered that this was a technique that they used, and I thought it might be effective.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, do you want to keep going forward for a little bit? Let's look at some of these objects and then we'll come back and focus on some of them. So these are sketches that are hanging on the back of the mesh that is covering the walls of the portico area. And I think it's a really, I don't know if we have a great installation shot where you can see them together. I think it's sort of more from a side view.
We do. I think we have one coming up.
Let's see what happens next. Let's keep going through these. Just keep going to see where we end up. And some of these are, I guess, are just close-ups of the not installation shots when they're not on the mesh. Yeah, so that's just an image of one of the sketchbooks. But I think what's really so you can sort of like, I guess it's more from a side view.
We do have an image, but I don't know. Maybe we don't. I don't.
Well, maybe we'll come. Oh, there we go. That's a good one. Yeah. So I think what's really, this is sort of a nice moment also where we're talking about this kind of relationship between fact and fiction, and where, the cast panel images, those you really have to interpret as the knight's memories, right? They're not actually objects in a way that you find in his home in a certain sense. But these really are meant to be sort of as if he was coming home, and this is his sort of travel diary, and he made these images along the way. And in fact, these are, in a sense, Curtis's travel diary, because these are drawings that he has made on his many journeys. And he's sort of hung them up, much like one would do if one was an artist hanging things up on one's studio wall. So this is sort of another moment of kind of bringing back to the reality, in a sense, of where you are.
Yeah. Being at the drawing center, seeing drawings hung, right. Maybe not so traditional, but again, taking you just out of the feeling that you're in his estate, but now you're at a museum viewing things.
Right. Do we want to go back and look at the nose quickly, Curtis? And do you want to talk for a minute about that, since it's an important piece for you?
Yeah.
Go back. And I'm also mindful of time, because I do want to leave time for questions, and we're already, so we may have to move quickly, I think, after this. Sure. But why don't you talk a little bit about this piece?
So this idea, I was inspired to make this nose because back in the Netscape internet days, I've since tried to track this down, but it's so hard to. The National Geographic issued an apology for the way that they handled the coverage and the announcing of discoveries from Egypt. And they acknowledged that sometimes objects would purposely have the nose taken off to mask the identity, connecting the sculptures to a different lineage versus it being people from Nuba and Kemet. So the idea is that Sir Dingole, on his travels, he goes and he starts reclaiming these noses. But the nose, my nose, this is a glass version of my nose. My nose changes, depends on the way my nose is viewed, depends on where I am in the world. In South Africa, I had a person identify, oh, you have Portuguese roots, you look at your nose. But in North America, like as a child, kids will want to make fun of your nose and say you have this big nose and blah, 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 blah. But then I get to Africa and they're like, oh, you're clearly mixed. That nose does not belong to this region. And so the nose for me still holds a lot of importance. And I just, again, I wanted to have this relic of, and so this is a Warahoon. Warahoon is a term for an indigenous person in Trinidad. And one afternoon, my brothers and I were walking and a guy stopped my brother whose nose is a little more pronounced than mine. And he was saying, Warahoon, Warahoon. And again, it gave me another branch to just trace off of, to jump off of and look into who a Warahoon was. And so I wanted to include this.
Yeah. Great. All right, let's go forward. I think maybe we should exit out of this portico. Izzy, yeah, great. So this is proceeding. Oh, I was going to just mention, go to the next image. Yeah, this image I'm just going to quickly mention because this is one of my favorite works in the show. I just think it's so stunningly beautiful. It's called Alu's The Light. And I think it's a really great example of the way in which Curtis marries drawing and the line and paint, and specifically spray paint. I think really the materials that you are consistently using are spray paint and charcoal.
Yeah.
Charcoal being your sort of drawing medium and spray paint being your paint medium. And I think for me, so what you're looking at here is this image of this robed female figure, and she's kind of barely emerging out of this sort of golden haze in the background. And I think for Curtis, charcoal really has this kind of anchoring sensibility, right? You see it as kind of the oldest material, that it has this real history. Yes. Behind it. And so here you have this figure that is kind of, this sort of anchoring moment in this otherwise very diffuse, diffuse atmosphere in a sense. And it's almost like she's kind of barely holding on. I mean, she's there and she's definitely there, but she's also sort of merging into this hazy atmosphere, which I guess is sort of life itself, I guess.
Joy.
It's this tension between the sort of chaos and uncertainty of life and those moments, those temporary moments of holding and presence, of who we are in this very vast world. And I think drawing really and painting work for you that way, and particularly well in this image.
that time has a way of changing, or the importance of certain works for, I don't know if this other artists feel this way, but for me, especially at this time, this was created when I first arrived in Portugal following an instinct. So just a quick story is that I did not know anyone in Portugal. I just had this feeling that I wanted to go and explore these Moorish nights. And that painting that brought me there, Chefferie del Rey, well, early on in my trip, I meet some people, they invite me to dinner, and I find out one of the people at this dinner owns that painting, Chefferie del Rey. So shortly after that, I'm in my studio and just in such a moment of bliss and peace as the Portuguese light, which is like no other, is shining in, and I just learning to follow the instinct, trusting that intuition, that literally following the light. And this moment captures how joyful I actually was and can be at times, but at this moment was just seeing this today, really knowing, how movement, especially for someone who's been moving around so much, is now restricted. I just have a new love for this.
Yeah. Okay, let's move out. And Curtis, I'm worried about time because I want to make sure we have time for questions. So do you think we should just go straight to watching the video?
Good.
Instead of talking about any more individual work? It just flew by. I could talk for hours here. I feel like this is...
The drawing, the Instagram live, like half hour flies like that.
Right. It's so different than when you're doing it in person, I guess, because you're sitting down or whatever. You're not physically tired. But so, okay, so let's just scroll through these, Izzy, and so people can see them, and then we'll end up at the video, and hopefully we'll be able to show you the video. So now we're walking around, and there's some close-ups interspersed with images that are, guiding you through. And now we're entering the video room, and I think we're able to show the video shortly. We think. We will see. So give us some time to figure that out. And if it doesn't work, we will
just move to
yeah.
available to be seen. Oh, looks like we got it.
It's very short. It's like on a loop.
She in a heart, and he lock up every door. Then he put she on a cart, and he start to go no go. K cause she way down down.
And then it just goes again. Oh, we got Curtis. We got, does everyone else have Curtis? I have you on my big screen now. Oh, here we go. Okay.
There we go.
We're back. So do you want to talk about the film for a bit, Curtis? A minute?
Well, again, yeah, the film acts as a time portal. It was a piece that I created for the temple itself was created for the Toronto Biennial, and then the film was commissioned by the Drawing Center. But it's just the first installment of where we'll be introduced to two other beaded night outfits. And so the first one, Sir Dingley stumbles upon the temple, and he's celebrating, and he has no idea of what's in store for him.
Yeah.
And so in the temple, you see there was some drawings on the ruined walls, and it's I've mentioned before, it's called the Juve Temple. And so this will be seen time and time again as we brings this night and various nights through different worlds.
Right. And I love the way it's like there's this great joy and he's just having this great time, but then all of a sudden, no, it stops. And he closes down the construction netting. And so it's really, he's not quite there yet. He's almost there. He has this moment of celebration, but he's not quite there yet. And his journey is going to continue. And as Curtis says, there's going to be future iterations of that film. So I think maybe we should see if people have questions.
Yes, exactly.
We may have some more images, so we can scroll through those as we take questions. I don't remember how many more images are part of this, but should we do that? Should we see?
Or just a couple more close up of the rock and.
Yeah. Do you want to just scroll through the rest of the? Okay.
Yeah.
And I see. Okay. Yeah, and this is a really beautiful. All right, this is the final image. I don't know if you want to talk about this for a second or no.
The four of them made a promise. Here we have the trickster, the Jab Jab, who collects souls in his net, and he's giving the soul to Sir Dingole, who is crouched, and he has his hand kind of cupped holding the light, because he's going to put the light into the belly of the female figure standing behind. It's hard to see because it's very matte black paint with black charcoal, but it's that silhouette of a woman, and her belly looks to be growing. And there's two solid red faces for her and Sir Dingole, but the red face in the center isn't fully formed. You can see it kind of growing. And again, this is as simply as my dream, my manifestation for family.
Yeah, and I think it's really also this is also another really wonderful example of the way drawing and painting work together. And the drawing, which is hard to see here, but you can see it up close, as kind of anchoring and outlining and forming the sort of basic structure of the figures. And then these moments of paint are sort of representing that life spirit, like Curtis is saying, that glow, that sort of, that, intangible element that, is in all of us. So okay, I think we have we can take some questions. I guess the way to do that is you post them in the chat. Is that how it works? I see this from Curtis briefly mentioned that the video is available elsewhere, but that's not. Do you want to answer that, Curtis?
Yes, it's available to see, I believe, on the Drawing Center website. I think we have it up there, as well as my website, which is just curtissantiago.art. And then on Instagram as well, at Talwst, at TALWST. So there's, right. Yeah.
And there will be future videos that he will be making, like future episodes in the life of Sir Dingole, I guess.
The hope still, fingers crossed, is to wear the suit of armor that is currently being shown at Rachel Uffner's The Jab Jab Night as he enters Sir Dingole's world. So we don't know. Again, the plan was originally to then shoot something within the installation, but we're just going with the flow and seeing what happens.
Yeah, yeah. Any other questions? I mean, it's fine if it's an odd format to type questions. Fine. If not, I'll just say, let's see, someone says, I am interested in the paper cast bricks. Can you talk about the materials and process involved?
Sure. So it's, the long and short of it, it's recycled paper pulp with archival glue, the formula, and in between the two layers, we have cheesecloth because the walls break. I tend to, as I'm working, to break a piece off, and because we have to be able to cut it to reassemble. The process is we just like you would cast anything. We make a urethane rubber mold of the wall, and then we cast our paper pulp in it, and we let it dry. It took us about a year and a half, 2 years to make because it needed to sure, I'll put that in here. It needed to be able to hold pigment of all the different mediums I'd be able to be working on. Needed to be able to sand it. But when you see it in person, it actually reads like real brick, and it has all the detail of stone and looks much heavier than it is. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, and it really feels like paper. That's the other wonderful thing. You go up to it. I mean, Curtis let me touch it. So, but when you go up to it, it looks like it's going to be hard. It looks like it's going to be brick, and then you feel it, and you feel the softness of the paper. It's really amazing. So I'll just say other things just about Curtis. Curtis is if you're doing some wonderful live drawing sessions with us. On most Tuesdays. We'll see we hope that will continue, but he's done 3 with us so far. He's bringing in guests, live on the Drawing Center's Instagram Live Tuesdays at 12:30, which is really has been wonderful. I think everyone has really
much fun.
And also we are working on producing the catalog for Curtis's show, and that should be available fairly soon. And I think we're going to make the PDF available in some fashion. I'm not sure, we can't actually ship books out yet, but if you follow the Drawing Center, you will be, or if you're on our eBlast list, you will be made aware when that book is ready. And there's a really, there's an essay by myself, as well as an amazing conversation between Curtis and a Canadian art patron named Kenneth Montague, who, like Curtis, is an immigrant from, or his family immigrated from Jamaica in his case, I believe. But it's they have a really great conversation about that situation of being sort of the diasporic experience in Canada, as opposed to, I mean, that's one of the topics they discuss. And it's something you mentioned at the beginning of this talk, as opposed to the situation of African Americans. So they get into that very particular Canadian experience. And then there's also a fragment or sample, what's the word I'm looking for? Collections from a book of poetry by an incredible poet named M. Norbezi Phillips, who is also Trinidadian Canadian. And the poem speaks also to issues of kind of diasporic experience, although different ones. Memory, yeah.
I call her a great tanty, the wise aunt, and the mission needed that voice, and I'm so thrilled to have her contribution. Zong is the name of her poetry book, and she recently won a huge literary prize, international prize, and she's just a phenomenal poet.
So I guess if no one has any other questions, I think that we will end it. Oh, we have one more question here. The
night finally speaking, the journey continues. In some sense, yes. One thing I found is that, there was times when I first got to Portugal, hearing of the issues with Africa and colonization of Portugal, expecting to meet older Portuguese people and having moments of friction or weirdness that sometimes I encounter along my tribal microaggressions, and being so beautifully surprised on how people are just people, and we all do want the same things. And when we put those things aside and we meet each other with openness, what can happen? And my experience, there's so many, my practice is guided by intuition and following these moments. And there were so many moments over these last 4 years of a broader understanding of what it means to be human versus the labels that we give ourselves or put upon us. So he's still seeking, yes and no. And that's what the exhibition kind of feels like, yes and no. Is it up, is it down? Is it coming together, or is it deconstructing?
But as you said at the beginning, there is so much joy in the exhibition, and I feel like we need that now, and I really hope we'll be able to open it again so people can experience that.
I hope so too.
Will this Zoom session be available? I don't know the answer to that. Maybe someone behind the scenes knows the answer to that. Will this Zoom session be available for viewing? Someone may.
If the file is able to be saved and there is a file, I know I'll be putting it up on my website and my Vimeo.
Assuming all goes well, yes, is the answer from the Drawing Center to everyone. So, all right. So let's see. You must have hundreds of drawings from your travels and sketchbooks. Okay. So here's another question, Curtis. Do you want to answer that? Can you talk about how you chose which ones to include?
Because the drawings from the sketchbooks were never meant to be, for me, I never intended that while I was working that they would be shown. I almost had to have, I gave a bunch to Claire. I said, here are the books, which ones resonate with you? And then a dear friend of mine organized them because I wanted to feel detached from them. I don't want to become precious about what I put in my sketchbooks, because that's the space to just really explore, be loose and be free. So yes, I put that in the capable, competent hands of Claire, and she chose a selection.
And there are actually more, I think, in the catalog. Do we end up doing that?
Yeah, I think a few more.
That we didn't, that were not in the netting, or didn't end up on the walls. But yeah, Curtis has many amazing drawings. We were only able to include a sample of them. Thank you, Edwin. That's a very nice comment.
Yeah, thank you.
So, okay, I feel like I'm like an going once, although I actually can't officially end this meeting. I realize I can only leave the meeting. So someone behind the scenes is going to end the meeting. But I guess, yeah, any other questions? Thank you, everyone, for your.
Thank you yep. Thank you. Thank you, Claire.
Okay, I guess we will officially close out now. Thank you, Curtis. I'll be seeing you soon. In one way, in one form or another.
Yes, you will.
Okay.
Everybody stay healthy, stay well, and yeah.
Bye.